Hey guys, welcome to Stories to the Nation, and we've got something super special for you guys today. A Winnie the Pooh sleep story from therapeutic storyteller Dan Jones. Now listen, if you guys want to hear more stories like this, let me know in the comments. Alright, time to get cozy, close those eyes, and let the story carry you away. Later guys.
Pooh's Honey Heist. In that enchanting corner of the world, known as the 100-Acre Wood, where trees whispered secrets to the wind and streams hummed lullabies, there lived a bear of very little brain but of an enormous heart. His name was Winnie the Pooh, or Pooh for short. One fine morning, as the sun peeked over the horizon and painted the sky with hues of pink and gold, Pooh woke up with a peculiar sensation. It was a rumbling in his tummy, a sort of grumble and mumble that seemed to say, time for a little smackerel of something. With a yawn and a stretch, Pooh rolled out of bed and padded over to his cupboard. He reached for a pot of honey, his favourite kind of smackerel. But as he dipped his paw into the pot, his heart sank. The pot was empty. Not a single drop of honey was left. Pooh, puzzled, checked another pot, then another. His brow furrowed and his small eyes widened in surprise. Every single pot was as empty as the last. His cupboard, usually a treasure trove of honey pots, was barren. But I don't remember eating all that honey, Pooh said to himself, scratching his head. He sat down and thought hard, which was a rather strenuous activity for a bear with very little brain. His tummy gave another rumble, louder this time, as if to remind him of the urgency of the situation. A feeling of worry began to creep over Pooh. A day in the 100-Acre Wood without honey was like a tree without leaves, unthinkable and rather sad. He knew there was only one thing to do. He must go on a quest to find more honey. And so, with a determined look on his face, Pooh set off. He didn't know where the journey would take him or what adventures lay ahead. All he knew was that a bear needed his honey, and he was going to find it. As he stepped out of his house, the 100-Acre Wood was coming alive. The birds were singing, the leaves rustling in the breeze, and the morning sun was casting long, playful shadows. It was a perfect day for an adventure. Think, 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 Pooh hummed to himself as he strolled along the familiar path. Where can a bear find some honey? Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a grand adventure, an adventure that would take him to the farthest corners of the 100-Acre Wood and beyond. But for now, Pooh, with his rumbling tummy and hopeful heart, walked on, ready to face whatever the day had in store for him. After all, as he often said, you never can tell with bees. With a sense of purpose and a rumbling tummy, Pooh set off towards the house of his very small but very thoughtful friend Piglet. The path to Piglet's house was a familiar one, lined with tall, friendly trees that seemed to wave their branches in greeting. Upon reaching Piglet's house, Pooh knocked on the door. "Hello, Piglet," he called out. "It's me, Pooh. I have a bit of a problem." Piglet, who's in the middle of a rather important spring clean, opened the door. "Why, hello, Pooh," he said, looking at his friend's worried face. Come in, come in. What seems to be the problem?" Pooh explained his predicament about the empty honey pots and the rumbling tummy. Piglet listened attentively, his small eyes filled with concern. "That is a problem," he agreed, "but I think I might have a solution." Piglet suggested they visit the bees living in the tall trees at the edge of the 100-acre wood. After all, he said, bees make honey. Pooh's face lit up at the idea. "Oh, Piglet, you are very clever," he exclaimed. "Let's go visit the bees." And so, with Piglet by his side, Pooh set off towards the tall trees. The journey was not an easy one. They had to cross a wide river, which was rather tricky as Pooh was not a very good swimmer. But with a little help from a friendly log that served as a boat, they managed to get across. Next, they had to climb a steep hill. Pooh, being a bear of as little brawn as brain, found the climb quite exhausting. But Piglet, ever the encouraging friend, cheered him on. "You're doing great, Pooh," he said. "We're almost there." Finally, they had to navigate through a dense, thorny bush. The thorns caught at their fur and made them wince. But they pushed on, their minds filled with thoughts of honey. As they emerged from the thorny bush, they saw the tall trees in the distance. The sight filled them with hope. Their journey, though filled with obstacles, had brought them one step closer to their goal. "Look, Piglet," said Pooh, pointing at the trees. "We're almost there. Soon we'll have all the honey we could ever want." Piglet nodded, a determined look on his face. "Yes, Pooh," he said, "we're almost there." After a journey filled with trials and tribulations, Pooh and Piglet finally reached the tall trees where the bees made their home. The trees towered above them, their branches reaching up to the sky like the arms of a giant. High up in the trees, they could see the bees buzzing around their hives, the golden honey glinting in the sunlight. Pooh, with a determined look on his face, approached the tallest tree. He placed his paws on the trunk and began to climb. It was not an easy task for a bear with a lot of tummy, but Pooh was not one to give up easily, especially when honey was involved. Piglet watched from the ground, his small heart filled with worry. "Be careful, Pooh," he called out, his voice barely audible over the buzzing of the bees. Pooh climbed higher and higher, his eyes fixed on the honey-filled hives. But the bees were not pleased with this intrusion. With a loud buzz, they swarmed around Pooh, their tiny bodies a blur of black and yellow. "Oh, bother," Pooh muttered, trying to swat the bees away. But the bees were relentless. They buzzed around him, their stings sharp as needles. Pooh, realizing the danger, decided to make a hasty retreat. With a yelp, Pooh let go of the tree trunk and tumbled down, landing with a thud in a prickly bush. Piglet rushed over, his small face filled with concern. "Oh, Pooh," he cried, "are you all right?" Pooh, despite the stings and scratches, managed a small smile. "I'm all right, Piglet," he said, "just a little ruffled." Despite the setback, Pooh was determined not to give up. He had come too far, and his tummy was rumbling too loudly to admit defeat. "We must find another way to get the honey," he said, pulling himself out of the prickly bush. Piglet, inspired by his friend's determination, nodded. "Yes, Pooh," he said, "we'll find another way." And so, despite their failed attempt, Pooh and Piglet did not lose hope. They knew that the road to honey was not an easy one, filled with wide rivers, steep hills, prickly bushes, and protective bees. But they also knew that, with a little bit of courage and a lot of friendship, they could overcome any obstacle. As they sat under the tall trees, nursing their scratches and planning their next move, they realized that this was more than just a quest for honey. It was an adventure, a grand adventure in the 100-acre wood. And as long as they had each other, they knew they could face any challenge, no matter how big or small. After all, as Pooh often said, it's so much more friendly with two. With their spirits undeterred by the recent setback, Pooh and Piglet decided that it was time to ask for help. Pooh said a little consideration, a little thought for others, makes all the difference. And so they set off to visit their wise friend, Owl. Owl lived in an old oak tree, in a house filled with books and scrolls. He was the wisest creature in the 100-acre wood, and Pooh and Piglet hoped that he would have a solution to their problem. Upon reaching Owl's house, they explained their predicament. Owl, with his spectacles perched on his beak, listened attentively. After a moment of thought, he suggested, "Why not try to trade something for honey at Rabbit's house? Rabbit always has honey, and he might be willing to trade." Pooh's face lit up at the idea. He remembered he had a red balloon at home, which he thought Rabbit might like. "Oh, Owl, you are a wise bird indeed," he exclaimed. "Come on, Piglet, let's go get that balloon." And so they returned to Pooh's house and retrieved the red balloon. It was a beautiful balloon, bright and shiny, and it bobbed cheerfully as Pooh held it. With the balloon in tow, they set off towards Rabbit's house. Rabbit lived in a cozy burrow under a large tree. He was a good friend and always had a pot of honey or two in his pantry. When Pooh and Piglet arrived at Rabbit's house and presented the red balloon, Rabbit's eyes sparkled with delight. "Oh, what a splendid balloon!" he exclaimed. "I'd be happy to trade it for a pot of honey." And so Pooh and Piglet traded the red balloon for a pot of honey. They thanked Rabbit for his kindness and set off towards home, their hearts filled with joy and their hands holding the precious pot of honey. As they walked back, the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The 100-acre wood was bathed in a warm, golden light, and everything seemed to be celebrating their victory. The trees swayed gently, the birds sang sweetly, and the river gurgled happily. Pooh and Piglet, with their pot of honey, walked hand in hand, their faces glowing with happiness. They had faced many challenges, but they had also learned many things. They learned that sometimes you need to ask for help. They learned that a little bit of thought can solve big problems. But most importantly, They learned that friendship and kindness are the sweetest things in the world, even sweeter than honey. With the setting sun casting long, playful shadows, Pooh and Piglet made their way back home, their hearts light and their hands clutching the precious pot of honey. The 100-acre wood seemed to be celebrating their victory, with the trees rustling in applause and the river humming a congratulatory tune. Upon reaching Pooh's house, they sat down at Pooh's table, the pot of honey gleaming in the soft evening light. Pooh, with a satisfied sigh, dipped his paw into the pot and took a lick of the golden, sticky sweetness. His eyes closed in delight, as the taste of honey, as delicious as ever, filled his mouth. "Oh, Piglet," he said, his voice filled with contentment, "this is the best honey I've ever tasted." Piglet, watching his friend, couldn't help but smile. "I think it's because of the adventure we had to get it, Pooh," he said. "It made the honey even sweeter." Pooh opened his eyes and looked at Piglet. His small friend was right. The honey was indeed sweet, but it was the journey they had embarked on, the challenges they had overcome, and the friendship they had shared that made it even sweeter. As Pooh savoured his honey, he realised something. Honey, as wonderful as it was just a thing. It was the memories created, the lessons learned, and the bonds strengthened during the quest for honey that were truly precious. "Yes, Piglet," Pooh said, his soft voice. "You're right. The honey is sweet, but the adventure was even sweeter." And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Pooh and Piglet sat in comfortable silence, their hearts full of joy and their minds full of memories. They had set out on a quest for honey, but they'd found something even more valuable, the realization that life's sweetest moments come not from the things we seek, but from the journey we undertake and the friends we share it with. In the quiet serenity of the 100-acre wood, under the watchful eyes of the twinkling stars, Pooh and Piglet celebrated their victory, not over the bees, or the river, or the thorny bush, but over the challenges of life. They'd faced obstacles, they had stumbled and fallen, but they had also risen stronger and wiser. And as they sat there, a bear of very little brain and his very small friend, they knew that this was not the end. It was just the beginning of many more adventures, many more quests for honey, and many more sweet moments of friendship. For in the end, it was not the honey that mattered, but the love, friendship, and memories that were created in the quest for it. And as Pooh often said, sometimes the smallest things take up the most room in your heart. Eeyore's Bright Day. On an early summer morning, as the sun was just beginning to rise over the 100-acre woods, our dear old friend Eeyore was stirring. Usually, Eeyore was the last to greet the morning, preferring instead the solitary peace of his own thoughts. But on this particular morning, something rather unusual occurred. Eeyore, that lovable but perpetually gloomy donkey, awoke with a spring in his step and a twinkle in his eye. He stretched out his long, grey ears, stood up on his sturdy little legs and said aloud to no one in particular, "What a splendid morning this is." And with that, he set off for a gentle stroll through the woods, his tail swishing from side to side in a most un-Eeyore-like fashion. As he moved, he hummed a small tune, one that the birds seemed to pick up and carry along the morning breeze. The melody whistled through the branches as Eeyore greeted the flowers, the buzzing bees, and even the dew-kissed grass beneath his hooves. He seemed to carry with him a kind of joy that was so unfamiliar that the very air around him seemed to pause, puzzled but pleased. Now it wasn't long before the 100-acre wood's other inhabitants began to stir. The first to awaken, as he often was that bear of very little brain, Winnie the Pooh. Pooh, you see, had a particular fondness for the early morning, as it was a splendid time for thinking about the first honeypot of the day. As he ambled out of his house, he noticed something quite peculiar. There was a new sound in the air, a humming, a whistling, a sort of happy huffing and puffing. Pooh tilted his round head to one side, listening closely. "That's not the sound of honey," he mumbled to himself, "and it's certainly not a sound of heffalumps. It's something different, something cheery." Just then, the small figure of Piglet appeared, wiggling his tiny ears in the morning light. He, too, heard the unfamiliar sound. "Pooh," he said in his small voice, "do you hear that? It sounds like it couldn't be Eeyore." The two friends looked at each other, their eyes wide with wonder. Eeyore, their ever gloomy friend, making such a joyful noise. It was almost too strange to believe. And yet, as they traced the sound, they found Eeyore prancing, yes, prancing through the meadow, a wide grin on his usually sombre face. "But Pooh," stammered Piglet, "what do you suppose has come over Eeyore?" "I don't quite know, Piglet," Pooh replied, watching Eeyore with bemusement, "but it's rather a pleasant change, isn't it?" And so the 100-acre woods started its day with a dash of cheer and a sprinkle of intrigue, as its inhabitants began to wonder about the quite surprising and rather delightful transformation of their old friend Eeyore. In the midst of their bewilderment, Pooh and Piglet agreed that they must get to the bottom of this most surprising mystery. After a quick snack of honey and acorns, they set off, trailing after their unusually cheerful friend. "First things first," said Pooh, puffing out his chest importantly. "We must observe Eeyore closely." "Yes," agreed Piglet, his eyes wide with anticipation. "We should take notes like Christopher Robin does when he's learning." And so they watched. They watched as Eeyore stopped to admire a daisy, its petals still wet with morning dew. They watched as he shared a friendly nod with a passing butterfly, the corners of his mouth twitching upwards in an amicable smile. They watched as he hummed along to the merry songs of the birds, his hoof tapping out a rhythm on the forest floor. It was during this time of keen observation that Owl flew by, his wide eyes narrowing as he saw Pooh and Piglet following Eeyore around. Sensing a grand tale in the making, he landed on a nearby branch. "What are you two up to?" he hooted, perching on his branch. "We're observing Eeyore," explained Piglet. "He's been acting rather un-Eeyore-like today." Al pondered this, and after a moment he offered, "Perhaps it's the weather. A good bit of sun can often lighten one's mood." "But Eeyore has seen many sunny days before," countered Pooh, "and he's never quite been this cheerful." "You're right, Pooh," Owl admitted. "This requires more investigation." Just then, Rabbit, Kanga, and little Roo hopped over, attracted by the commotion. When they were filled in on the mystery, they too agreed to help solve it. They each had their theories. Rabbit thought it was something he ate. Kanga suggested it might be the freshness of the summer air, and Roo, being the smallest, said he was simply happy because it was a fun day. And so the observing continued. They watched Eeyore from morning till noon, hiding behind trees and bushes, noting down every cheerful movement and every happy hum. Eeyore, for his part, was so engrossed in his own joy that he paid them no mind, even as they followed him about, scribbling notes and whispering to each other. As the day went on, they began to see that Eeyore was not only cheerful, but also more attentive to the world around him. He would stop to appreciate a patch of soft moss or a gently rustling leaf. He would watch with fascination as a caterpillar made its slow way across a twig, or as a spider wove its intricate web. "That's it," whispered Pooh, eyes shining with revelation. "He's seeing the beauty in the small things." And indeed, it seemed Eeyore was finding joy in the simplest of delights. He was discovering the magic of the 100-acre woods in every petal and every pebble, in every sunbeam and every shade, in the rustle of the leaves and the hush of the breeze. And as the 100-acre woods watched one of their own rediscover the world around them, they felt a twinge of joy too. The mystery was not yet solved, but they were beginning to understand, if just a little, while their old friend was suddenly so full of cheer. Eeyore, all the while unaware of the intrigue he'd stirred, was sauntering through the 100-acre woods, his heart light with the simple joy of a splendid summer day. As he made his way to the open meadow, he came across a honey bee. Now bees and Eeyore did not usually have much in common. You see, the bee was all about making honey, and Eeyore, well, he was usually more about thistles. But today was different. Today was a day for new things, and so Eeyore decided it was a day for making a new friend. "Hello, bee," Eeyore greeted, trying to put a little more buzz in his voice. In an effort to speak bee language, the bee paused in her flight, hovering in the air as she regarded Eeyore. "Hello, donkey," she replied, for bees, as we all know, are very good with languages. "Isn't it a lovely day?" Eeyore continued, waving his tail a bit, just as he had seen bees wave their antennae. "It is," the bee agreed, making a little circle in the air before she settled on a nearby daisy. They exchanged pleasantries, talking about the weather, the flowers, and the delights of summer. And then, in the middle of the conversation, the bee told Eeyore a secret. her voice barely a whisper in the summer breeze. Eeyore, the beauty of the world lies in the appreciation of the smallest joys. This little piece of wisdom, so simple and yet so profound, made Eeyore even happier. He thanked the bee for her wise words and promised to keep them close to his heart. Unbeknownst to them, the other animals had been watching this exchange from behind a bush. Upon hearing the bee's secret, their faces lit up with surprise and revelation. "Did you hear that, Pooh?" Piglet whispered, his eyes wide. "I did, Piglet," Pooh replied, his brow furrowed in thought. "And I think I'm beginning to understand why Eeyore has been so cheerful." The others huddled closer, each of them processing the bee's words in their own way. Rabbit, the logical one, turned it over and over in his mind. Owl, the wise, contemplated its deeper meaning. Kanga and Roo shared a look of understanding, while Pooh and Piglet considered how this new knowledge could be applied to their own lives. Eeyore's newfound joy was not due to an extraordinary event or a grand adventure, but rather the simple appreciation of life's smallest moments. It was a revelation that sparked a ripple of comprehension among the inhabitants of the 100-acre woods. And yet they were unsure of what to do next. Could they, like Eeyore, find such profound happiness in the simplest of joys? As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the woods in hues of orange and pink, they decided to try and find out. With newfound resolve and a sense of anticipation, they looked forward to the morrow, ready to embark on an adventure of joy in the smallest of things, the quietest of moments, and the simplest of pleasures. The following day, as the sun rose over the 100-acre woods, the residents set about their new endeavour. Each of them, in their own way, tried to apply the wisdom shared by the honeybee to Eeyore, to appreciate the small joys and find happiness where they hadn't before. Pooh, with his mind fixed on the honeybee's words, decided to spend the morning observing the bees rather than focusing on their honey. But as he watched them buzzing around, he couldn't help but think about the sweet taste of honey and how it dribbled down onto his paw in a pleasant, sticky mess. He found himself missing his beloved honey, his tummy rumbling in protest. Piglet, too, attempted to find joy in the quiet, spending his day listening to the soft whisper of the wind and the gentle rustle of the leaves. But every tiny noise made him jump, and he found it rather difficult to relax and enjoy the quiet when he was worried about heffalumps and woozles sneaking up on him. Rabbit and Owl had their struggles too. Rabbit was so focused on keeping everything organized that he found it hard to pause and appreciate the beauty of a dew-dropped clover. Owl, meanwhile, was so used to dispensing wisdom that he found it challenging to simply listen to the hoots and tweets of the other birds without offering advice or insight. Even Kanga and Roo, who were generally adept at finding joy in simple things, found it a little tricky to shift their perspective. Kanga was so used to caring for Roo that she barely noticed the way the sun sparkled on the stream, and Roo, ever the adventurer, found it hard to appreciate the joy of a simple, quiet day without some sort of exploration or discovery. But as the day wore on, amidst their struggles and attempts, each of them began to discover new and unexpected sources of joy. Pooh, in his quest to appreciate bees, found that watching them work was almost as satisfying as eating honey. Almost. Piglet, despite his jitters, discovered that the gentle hum of the forest was rather comforting once he let himself relax. Rabbit found that the sun made rather beautiful patterns on his meticulously arranged vegetables, and Owl, to his surprise, enjoyed the symphony of the forest when he let it play without interruption. Kanga noticed the smile on Rue's face as he discovered a new type of bug, and Rue, in the quiet of the day, found a peaceful spot that was perfect for thinking. By the time the sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, each of them had experienced a day like no other. They'd learned, just like Eeyore, to see the beauty in the small joys around them, even though it had been a little more difficult than they'd expected. They all agreed it was worth it, as they gathered to share their experiences and newfound happiness. In the soft light of the setting sun, the friends of Hundred Acre Woods all gathered around Eeyore, who was reclining contentedly on his favourite patch of thistles. They were eager to share their experiences, their struggles, and the surprising little joys they had discovered throughout the day. Pooh went first, his paws fidgeting with anticipation. "I watched the bees today, Eeyore," he began, "and though I missed the taste of honey, I found the way they worked together to be rather fascinating. It was, well, it was a sort of small joy, I suppose." Eeyore nodded, his eyes bright. "And that, Pooh," he said, "is precisely the point." One by one, the others shared their experiences. Piglet spoke of the soothing hum of the forest, Rabbit of the sun's patterns on his vegetables, Owl of the music of the forest, and Kanga and Roo of the tiny wonders they'd discovered. Eeyore listened to each of them, his heart filling with a warm, comfortable joy, to know that his friends, his family, had found happiness in the little things, just as he had, was a wonderful thing indeed. When they'd all finished, Eeyore cleared his throat, ready to share his part. "Friends," he began, "I must confess, I never planned for any of this. One day, I simply decided to try something new, to appreciate the little things, the moments that usually go unnoticed, and it just happened to make me, well, happier." There was a silence as they all took in Eeyore's words. The simplicity of his method, the beauty of its outcome. Then, almost in unison, they all agreed to try to see the world as Eeyore had been doing, to find joy in small things and moments. "Thank you, Eeyore," Pooh said, his voice sincere, "for showing us a new way to see the world." Eeyore's cheerfulness, what had begun as an unexpected surprise, had transformed into a beacon of light for them all. They saw in him a model to emulate, a reminder that joy was not always found in grand gestures or big adventures, but often in the smallest, simplest moments. And so, as the last rays of the sun faded into the night, leaving behind a sky full of twinkling stars. The residents of the 100-acre woods made a pact. They would strive to see each day as a bright day, no matter the weather or circumstances, because they now knew that brightness wasn't always about the sun or the stars, but the light that one chose to see. And Eeyore, in the midst of his friends, his heart full of joy and gratitude, couldn't help but agree. After all, he had started this journey on his own, but now he had everyone to share it with, and that, in his opinion, was the greatest joy of all. "Here's to bright days," he murmured, looking around at his friends, "and the small joys that make them so." And they all agreed, in the stillness of the 100-acre woods, that every day could indeed be a bright day if one just chose to look for the light. The Great Balloon Race. Once upon a time, on a sunny day in the 100-acre wood, a round and somewhat rotund bear by the name of Pooh, accompanied by his small but ever so loyal friend Piglet, were out on one of their little ambles around the woods. It was just as they were passing by the old log that they noticed something quite out of the ordinary. Lying before them were two brightly coloured objects, quite deflated and a bit sad-looking. "What could these be?" asked Piglet, his tiny eyes wide with curiosity. "They seem like balloons," said Pooh, thinking very hard, as he often did when faced with a puzzle. "Balloons?" Piglet echoed, his ears perking up. "But whatever are they doing here?" Pooh shrugged his shoulders, but his eyes sparkled with an idea. "We could have a balloon race," he suggested. "A balloon race?" squeaked Piglet. "But how do we—" "That," Pooh declared, "is a question for Christopher Robin." So hand in hand, Pooh and Piglet trotted off in the direction of Christopher Robin's house, the deflated balloons bobbing along behind them. Christopher Robin was sitting outside, his back against a tree, as he pored over a book. He looked up as Pooh and Piglet approached, and a smile spread across his face when he saw the deflated balloons. "We've come for your advice," Pooh announced, puffing out his chest importantly. "We've decided on a balloon race." Christopher Robin laughed at the idea. "A balloon race, is it? Well, that does sound fun, but it'll take more than just speed, you know. It'll take teamwork, too." "Teamwork?" repeated Pooh, his brow furrowed in thought. "Yes, teamwork," replied Christopher Robin. "You see, it's not just about racing each other. It's about helping each other, too, especially when things become difficult." So Christopher Robin gave Pooh and Piglet two sets of instructions. One for inflating the balloons, which involved a great deal of puffing and blowing, much to Piglet's amusement, and another for the principles of racing, which he said were about not just being the fastest, but also being the kindest and the most helpful. Pooh and Piglet listened attentively, nodding and making notes in the ground with sticks. When Christopher Robin finished, they thanked him, their hearts filled with a sense of adventure and the spirit of friendly competition. That evening, as the sun began to set, Pooh and Piglet sat by the river, looking at their now inflated balloons. They were beautiful, bright and bouncy, full of promise for the exciting adventure that lay ahead. It was to be a race, yes, but as Christopher Robin had explained, it was also to be a test of their friendship and teamwork. And so, with a shared look of anticipation, they looked towards the sky, ready for their great balloon race to begin. The sun rose over Hundred Acre Wood, dousing it with a golden glow that seeped into the leaves and danced upon the rippling river. Pooh and Piglet had spent the night meticulously preparing for their great balloon race. With their newly inflated balloons bobbing beside them, they stood at the starting line, marked by 2 large acorns. "Ready, Piglet?" asked Pooh, his paw firmly holding his balloon's string. Piglet, looking up at his own balloon, nodded. "Ready, Pooh," he squeaked. With a gentle push off the ground, they were off, their balloons lifting them higher and higher into the bright morning sky. It was a splendid start, the breeze nudging their balloons in the same direction. As the 100-acre wood shrunk beneath them, their smiles grew wider and their laughter rang through the air. Their balloons bobbed and weaved in the sky like 2 colourful birds. Pooh and Piglet whooped with delight, their hearts filled with joy and a touch of nerves. But as they floated further and further away, they noticed the landscape below changing. The quaint and familiar openness of the 100-acre wood was slowly replaced by an area thick with tall, shadowy trees, their branches reaching up like long, gnarly fingers. Piglet looked down and gulped. "Oh, Pooh," he squeaked, "these trees look very tall, and we're very high. Perhaps we should turn back." Pooh looked at Piglet, then at the trees, and then back at Piglet. He nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, Piglet, they do look very tall indeed. But remember what Christopher Robin said about teamwork and challenges." Piglet's ears drooped slightly. "Yes, but—" "Well," Pooh continued, "I think this might be one of those challenges, and together I believe we can overcome it." Piglet swallowed, looking at Pooh's hopeful face. Then he looked at his own balloon, bright and buoyant, and felt a small surge of courage. "All right, Pooh," he said, taking a deep breath. "Let's keep going." And so Pooh and Piglet, 2 very small creatures in a very big world, ventured onwards. They navigated the tall trees, their balloons swaying with the wind as it whistled through the leaves. Though Piglet was scared and Pooh was a little nervous himself, they encouraged each other, their voices echoing in the stillness. Their journey was not just a race anymore. It was an adventure of courage, of resilience, of friendship. And though the trees seemed very tall and the wind a little cold, they knew they had each other. And with that knowledge, they felt ready to face whatever challenges the balloon race would bring. As the sun started to set, their shadows stretched out behind them, 2 small heroes on a grand adventure, forever bound by a shared journey and a pair of brightly coloured balloons. The early hours of the morning found Pooh and Piglet, 2 small adventurers in a rather large forest, floating on their brightly coloured balloons. Their path was riddled with towering trees whose branches swayed and creaked with the wind's whispers. A thin mist hung low, kissing the forest floor and giving the woods a mysterious allure. Without warning, a strong gust of wind, much like Owl when he was in one of his storytelling moods, took hold of Pooh's balloon. It swept him off course and right into a jagged branch of a nearby tree. There was a sudden pop as the balloon was punctured, followed by a soft hissing sound as it started to deflate. "Oh, bother," said Pooh as he began to descend rather swiftly. He grabbed onto a branch, his balloon shrivelling behind him. Now, Pooh wasn't one to complain much, but he did think it was rather unfortunate to be stuck on a tree branch so early in the morning. Piglet, who had witnessed the whole scene, gasped. "Pooh," he squeaked, watching his friend marooned high up in the tree. "Are you all right?" "I believe so, Piglet," Pooh called back, trying to keep his voice steady, "but I do seem to be stuck." Piglet wrung his hands, glancing around in panic. He didn't know how to help. He was just a very small animal, and the problem seemed very big. But then he remembered Christopher Robin's words, teamwork. He might not be big, but he and Pooh were a team, and together they could surely figure something out. "But Pooh," Piglet called up, "I have an idea." "Oh," said Pooh, trying to look down without letting go of the branch. "What is it, Piglet?" "You'll have to jump onto my balloon, Pooh," Piglet proposed. A silence fell upon the forest, the wind pausing as if holding its breath, waiting for Pooh's answer. Jump? Onto Piglet's balloon? It was a rather daring plan, but then again, thought Pooh, daring times call for daring measures. "If you think that will work, Piglet," said Pooh, squaring his shoulders, "I trust you." Piglet nodded, his little heart pounding like a drum. With a deep breath, he maneuvered his balloon closer to the tree, making sure he was positioned right under Pooh. "All right, Pooh," Piglet squeaked, his voice wobbling a little. "On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3, called Piglet, and with that, Pooh let go of the branch and jumped. With a thud that rattled the little piglet, Pooh landed on Piglet's balloon, the deflated remains of his own still attached to his paw. And just like that, two friends in one balloon continued their journey, holding on to each other, their shared laughter echoing through the 100-acre wood, testament to their bravery and their unbreakable bond of friendship. And so it was that Pooh and Piglet, two brave adventurers on a rather daring journey, found themselves sharing one balloon, bobbing their way through the 100-acre wood. Their laughter echoed through the trees, their smiles as bright as the afternoon sun that peered down upon them from a cloudless sky. However, as it often happens in adventures, there was a slight hitch. You see, with the extra weight, Piglet's balloon had started to descend quite rapidly, and before they knew it, they'd come to an abrupt stop, their balloon ensnared in a thorny bush. "Oh, bother," said Pooh, looking around. "We seem to be stuck again." But then Pooh's nose twitched, catching a familiar, delicious scent. His eyes widened. "Piglet," he said slowly, "do you smell that?" Piglet, who was trying to tug at the balloon, paused and sniffed. "Smell what, Pooh?" "Honey," replied Pooh, his voice filled with awe. "These are honey thistles." Piglet looked at the thistles surrounding them, noticing for the first time the golden honey gleaming in their hearts. "But Pooh," he warned, "we need to get the balloon out." "Honey," said Pooh again, as if he hadn't heard Piglet at all. "Just a little taste won't hurt." And before Piglet could protest, Pooh had stretched out his paw and was gingerly plucking a thistle. Despite their predicament, Pooh's eyes gleamed with delight as he tasted the honey, its sweetness spreading joy through his round tummy. Pooh, squeaked Piglet, watching his friend with a mixture of amusement and exasperation. We need to... Oh! For as Pooh ate, his actions were causing the thistles to loosen their hold on the balloon. The more thistles he ate, the more the balloon seemed to stir, like a sleepy animal waking from a long nap. Oh! exclaimed Pooh, honey dripping from his paw. Piglet, look! With one final tug, the balloon was free from the thistles. The sudden release sent them shooting up into the sky again. The ground fell away beneath them, the forest resuming its spot as a green carpet stretching out in all directions. Oh, Pooh! Piglet squealed in delight as they climbed higher and higher. You did it! Pooh, his face smeared with honey, beamed at his friend. Well, Piglet, he said, I suppose sometimes a little bit of honey is just what you need. And with that, Pooh and Piglet, with their shared balloon and shared laughter, continued on their journey. It wasn't just a balloon race anymore. It was a sign of their friendship, their courage, and as it turns out, Pooh's love for honey. As the sun began its descent, casting long, warm shadows across the 100-acre wood, Pooh and Piglet found themselves high above the trees, their hearts filled with triumph and their bodies a little tired from the day's adventures. They looked at each other, their shared balloon bobbing gently between them, and without a word they knew that their balloon race had transformed into something much more important, a grand adventure. Pooh, Piglet said after a while, do you think we should head back? Pooh, who was dreamily watching a butterfly flutter past, turned to Piglet and nodded. Yes, Piglet, I think that would be a good idea. And so, with the same teamwork that had brought them through tall trees and punctured balloon and a honey thistle bush, they carefully steered their balloon in the direction of home. The forest below was familiar and comforting, the canopy of trees a patchwork quilt of greens and browns. As they slowly descended, they could see their friends gathered in the clearing, their faces tilted upwards. There was Eeyore, Kangaroo, and Owl, and of course Christopher Robin, all waving and cheering as Pooh and Piglet touched the ground. Pooh, Piglet, Christopher Robin exclaimed, running up to them. You made it back. We did, said Pooh, grinning at his friend, and we had quite an adventure. Christopher Robin beamed at them. And you did so well, not because you won a race, but because you demonstrated the most exceptional teamwork. I'm very proud of you both. The cheers from their friends filled the air, and Pooh and Piglet, their chests swelling with pride, thanked them. They had started the day with a race, but what they had ended up with was so much more, an adventure that brought them closer and a friendship that was now stronger than ever. As the day drew to a close, Pooh and Piglet sat side by side, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. They were quiet, the day's adventure replaying in their minds. Piglet, Pooh said after a while, I think our next adventure should be one we undertake together. Piglet looked at his friend, a smile spreading across his face. I think that sounds wonderful, Pooh. And so, beneath the twinkling stars, they made a pact. Their future adventures would not be races, but journeys they undertook together. For in their hearts, they knew that together they could overcome anything, and that their shared laughter was the most wonderful sound in all of 100-Acre Wood. Rue's Big Jump. In the very middle of the 100-acre wood, where the sun cast dappled light through the leaves and the butterflies danced upon the breeze, a young kangaroo named Roo was staring with a rather serious look at the river. Not a small river, mind you, but a rather large one that had quite decisively taken it upon itself to split the wood into two halves. And at this moment it held all of Roo's attention. Roo, you see, had an idea, not just a small, everyday sort of idea like what to have for supper, which for Pooh would always be honey, but a big, important idea. He wanted, more than anything else, to jump over that river. He yearned to see what lay on the other side. Of course, because exploring is what adventurous young kangaroos like to do. But it was more than just that. He wished to prove to himself, in the deepest part of his heart where truth resides, that he was not just a little Joey any more. He wished to be Roo the kangaroo who jumped over the river. But, oh bother, the river was wide, and its current swift. It wasn't like hopping over a fallen log, or skipping across a small stream. No, this was a proper grown-up kangaroo jump. The thought of it brought a shiver down his spine and a rumble in his tummy. Not the good sort of rumble that meant it was time for a small smackerel of something, but the kind that meant he was scared. His mother, Kanga, the most sensible kangaroo in the whole wood, came over and nuzzled him lovingly. She had that way of knowing, the way mothers do, what was going on in his mind. "There's no rush, Roo," she said softly. "You have all the time in the world." Her voice was as warm as the sunbeams that filtered through the trees. But despite her comforting words, Roo couldn't stop his heart from yearning to leap across the river. Perhaps it was the stubbornness that comes from being young, or perhaps it was the very nature of being a kangaroo. But Roo felt a powerful urge within him to make that jump. It was as if the river had thrown down a challenge, and he couldn't resist responding. Every time he looked at it, it seemed to say, "Go on, Roo, see if you can do it." So there he sat, the little Joey with a big idea, gazing at the river. The 100-acre wood was peaceful around him, filled with the hum of bees and the whisper of leaves. But in his heart there was a great big wish, as wide and as swift as the river itself. And so our story begins, dear reader, with a young kangaroo's yearning. For as you well know, it is these yearnings that can lead to the most extraordinary adventures, especially in a place as full of surprises as the 100-acre wood. On the very next day, or maybe it was the day after next, time in the 100-acre wood was always a little bit fuzzy. Roo decided to share his big idea with his friends. He found Pooh first, ambling along in a thoughtful sort of way, a pot of honey clutched tightly in his paws. "Pooh," Roo started, nervously playing with his tail, "I want to jump over the river." Pooh looked rather puzzled at this, honey momentarily forgotten. "But isn't the river rather wide?" he asked, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. "Yes, Pooh," Roo answered, "it is, and that's why it's a bit scary, you see." Now Pooh, despite his love for honey, was also a very good friend, and so he nodded his head, understanding, filling his round eyes. "Well, Roo," he said, "if honey can give me the courage to face a swarm of bees, I believe it could help you jump a river. Would you like some?" He offered the pot of honey to Roo, a hopeful gleam in his eyes. Piglet was next. He was found in his little home, straightening out the furniture after a particularly windy night. "Oh dear, Roo," he stammered when Roo told him about the river. "That sounds rather risky, doesn't it?" "Maybe, Piglet," said Roo, "but it's something I have to do." Piglet looked at Roo with his small, kind eyes, with a nod of determination, said, "If it's something you have to do, Roo, then I shall be right there cheering you on. Remember, it's our friends that help us find the courage we need." Eeyore was found under his favourite thistle bush, gazing at his rather precariously constructed stick house. He murmured when Roo told him his big idea. "Rivers are not to be trifled with, you know. They can be unpredictable." "I know, Eeyore," Roo said, "but I want to do it anyway." Eeyore blinked at Roo, then sighed deeply, a sound that was somehow comforting. "Well," he said, "just be careful, Roo. We don't want any mishaps." With their words of encouragement, Roo felt a new energy stirring within him. He began to train, hopping here and there, from the sandy pit where Kanga did her washing, to the very top of the hill where Christopher Robin sometimes sat. Each day he would try to jump a little further, and each day he would feel a bit stronger. Yet every time he stood by the river's edge, the width of it still seemed daunting, as if the other side was forever slipping further away. But Roo would remember Pooh's faith, Piglet's support, and Eeyore's caution, and he would go back to his training, determined to make the big leap. For Roo was learning that being brave wasn't just about doing something daring, but also about pushing on, even when things seemed a little bit too difficult. And so each day in the 100-acre wood passed, filled with Roo's hops and jumps, his friends' cheer and caution, and of course the ever-present hum of anticipation as a young kangaroo's big idea was taking shape. After many days of hopping and bounding, of training and practicing, there came a day in the 100-acre wood when Roo felt ready. It was a fine day, with the sun shining brightly in a sky so blue it made the river look like a silver ribbon laid out on a grand patchwork quilt. Word had got around, as words have a way of doing in places like the 100-acre wood, and all the inhabitants had come to see Roo make his jump. Pooh was there, of course, clutching a pot of honey just in case, while Piglet, trying his best to look brave for Roo, was making sure everyone was being properly encouraging. Eeyore stood at a respectable distance, casting a wary eye at the river and mumbling something about respect for natural boundaries. Roo, with his heart pounding a bit faster than usual, took his position. He could feel the gaze of all his friends, their quiet whispers mixing with the rustling leaves and the chattering of the river. He took a few steps back, his little eyes fixed firmly on the other side of the river. He could do it. He would do it. With a deep breath, Roo ran. His little legs moved as fast as they could, each stride pushing him closer to the edge of the river. He could feel the wind whooshing past his ears, hear the cheers of his friends growing louder, and then, just as he was about to push off from the bank with all his might, he stopped. His fear, that nasty little bug that had been hiding in the corner of his heart, had suddenly reared its head and made him stop right at the edge of the river. For a moment, everything in the 100-acre wood seemed to stand still. The cheers of his friends faded into silence. The river paused in its chattering, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Roo stood there, his heart heavy with disappointment. He had come so close, but he had not jumped. He felt as if he had let himself down. Worse still, he had let his friends down. The sun was still shining. The birds were still singing. But for Roo, it felt as if a little cloud had suddenly appeared overhead. He had tried, oh how he had tried, but the river was still there, as wide and swift as ever, and he was still on this side, unable to make the jump. Roo's big day, the day he was supposed to show everyone that he was no longer a little Joey, had ended with him standing on the edge of the river. His big idea seeming to slip away like a leaf on the current. And though the river continued its journey, carrying with it Roo's unfulfilled leap, the 100-acre wood, ever the comforting friend, held its breath and waited, knowing well that every big leap starts with a small stumble. In the quiet moments following Roo's halted jump, the 100-acre wood seemed to hold its breath, the silence broken only by the soft burbling of the river. Roo stood, a small figure, against the broad expanse of the river, disappointment looming as large as the leap he had not taken. But friends, you see, have a wonderful way of filling even the deepest disappointments with light. Pooh was the first to approach Roo, a pot of honey held out like a comforting embrace. Roo, he said, with that gentle wisdom that often hid behind his love for honey, the bravest thing isn't always making the jump, it's deciding to try in the first place. And you, Roo, are very brave indeed. Piglet shuffled forward next, his small body barely a whisper against the rustling leaves. He looked at Roo, then at the river, then back at Roo. I could never even think about doing such a thing, Roo, he admitted, his small voice carrying an echo of awe. Just imagining it gives me a fit of the sneezes. Even Eeyore, in his own way, showed his admiration. He ambled over slowly, the thistle in his mouth moving in rhythm with his steps. You wanted to jump over the river, and you tried, he said. That's more than most of us can say, except, maybe, for that river. It does seem to have a way of moving along. Their words, kind and true, began to lift the cloud of disappointment from Roo's heart. He looked from one friend to another, and for the first time since his halted jump, a smile started to form on his face. Maybe he hadn't jumped over the river, but he had tried. He had faced his fear, and that was something to be proud of. With renewed courage, Roo decided to try again. But this time it was different. This time he would jump, not to prove he was no longer a little Joey, but simply because he wanted to. He wanted to feel the rush of the wind, the thrill of the leap, the satisfaction of achieving his goal. He wanted to jump for the joy of jumping. And so the 100-acre wood began to buzz with anticipation once again. Roo resumed his training, hopping further and higher, each leap echoing his determination. But this time There was a lightness in his steps, a joy that sprung from his heart, a reminder that the journey is just as important as the destination. The river continued its ceaseless flow, whispering tales of courage and friendship to the woods, and the sun still shone brightly, casting shadows that danced with Rue's renewed resolve. The 100-acre wood waited, its heartbeat in sync with Rue's, as our young kangaroo prepared for his second leap, a leap powered by friendship and the simple joy of trying. After a flurry of hoppings and boundings, after a sprinkling of heartful pep talks, the day came when Roo, buoyed by the gentle encouragement of his friends, approached the river again. There was a light in his eyes that had been absent before, a sparkle that seemed to twinkle with a new determination. This was not the same Roo that had stopped at the edge of the river. This was a Roo who'd found courage in the kindness of his friends and strength in his own heart. As the 100-acre wood held its breath, Roo took a moment to gaze at the river. He didn't see the width or the swift current. Instead, he pictured himself landing safely on the other side. The fear that had gripped him before seemed a distant memory, replaced with a sense of exhilaration and joy. Then, without a word, Roo ran. The world seemed to blur around him, the rustling of leaves a melody in his ears, the thump, thump, thump of his heart marking the rhythm of his stride. As he reached the edge, he didn't stop. With a tremendous push, he took the leap, a leap that was not just of distance, but of faith and courage. In a moment that seemed to stretch into forever, Roo was soaring through the air, the wind whistling in his ears, the river glinting below. Then, with a bounce that rang out like a peal of joyous laughter, Roo landed safely on the other side. He had cleared the river. The 100-acre wood erupted into cheer. Pooh let out a hearty hurrah, while Piglet squealed with delight. Even Eeyore managed a gruff, "Well done, Roo." The river, perhaps feeling a bit upstaged, babbled its congratulations, while the trees rustled their leaves in a standing ovation. Roo stood on the other side of the river, his little heart filled with the satisfaction of a goal achieved. A fear conquered. He had done it, not by trying to prove he was brave or strong, but by being true to himself, by listening to the yearnings of his own heart. He turned to his friends on the other side, their cheering faces a beacon of warmth and encouragement. "Thank you," he called out, his voice carrying the weight of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." And so, as the sun began to set over the 100-acre wood, painting the sky with hues of warmth and triumph, the friends returned home, their hearts light and full. The river continued its ceaseless journey, carrying tales of a little kangaroo's big leap, a leap that wasn't about distance, but about friendship, perseverance, and the joy of being true to oneself. For as our young kangaroo learned that day, sometimes the biggest leaps in life come from the smallest of hops, and the most powerful jumps come from the heart. The Mysterious Stranger. In a small corner of the 100-acre wood, where the wildflowers danced in the breeze and the bees hummed in perfect harmony, Christopher Robin, our small but wise boy, was having a picnic. His friends, Winnie the Pooh, the bear of very little brain but lots of love for honey, and Piglet, a very small animal, were there too. The sun was beaming down from a clear blue sky, warming the faces of our friends as they sat on a patchwork blanket amongst the daisies. They had honey sandwiches, naturally for Pooh, and other such picnic treats which were quite enjoyed by all. "Isn't it just the sort of day," said Christopher Robin, "to sit and do nothing at all?" "Except eat honey," Pooh added with a content sigh, licking his paws to savour the last bits of the sticky sweetness. "Just so," agreed Piglet. Though he wasn't as keen on honey as Pooh was, it seemed the right thing to say. As they enjoyed their picnic and the pleasantness of doing nothing in particular, Christopher Robin's eyes fell upon an unusual sight. There, leading from the nearby path and going around the honey pot, were footprints. Peculiar footprints. Footprints they had never seen before in the 100-acre wood. Christopher Robin got up to examine them closely, his face full of wonder. Pooh and Piglet looked on curiously. "These aren't like any footprints we've seen before, are they?" Christopher Robin said, crouching down to get a better look. Pooh squinted at them, his small black eyes thoughtful. "They don't look like rabbits, or eeyores, or owls, or kangurs, or roos." He listed off their friends carefully, trying to match the footprints to them. "And they're not like yours or mine, or Piglet's," Christopher Robin added, seeming even more intrigued. Piglet, who had been quiet till now, finally found his voice. "Could it be a heffalump?" he squeaked nervously. Christopher Robin laughed. "I don't think so, Piglet. Heffalumps don't usually visit the 100-acre wood, you know. Besides, these prints are quite small." He paused and looked at his two friends. "I think we might have a new friend in the 100-acre wood." "A new friend?" That was a most curious and exciting thought. A new friend meant new stories, new adventures, and new games. It meant a new voice to join in their songs, a new face to share their picnics, a new hand to join in their rounds of Pooh sticks. It was quite simply the most exciting thing that could happen on such a beautiful, sunny day. Their picnic was forgotten in the thrill of this new discovery. The rest of the day held a promise of an adventure, and the three friends were ready to meet it with open hearts. And so, in the golden light of the afternoon sun, a call to action rang through the 100-acre wood. Christopher Robin, our young and earnest leader, summoned all his friends for a grand assembly. With the mystery of the new footprints unfurling like an uncharted map, the wood seemed to hum with an unusual, electrifying anticipation. Eeyore, the old grey donkey, arrived with a slow, plodding gait, his tail swishing rhythmically behind him. Kanga, carrying Roo in her pouch, hopped over with an agility that defied her motherly demeanour. Owl, with his great round eyes and even greater wisdom, flew in with an air of scholarly interest. Assembled under the grand old oak, they listened attentively as Christopher Robin described the puzzling footprints. "We have a guest in the wood, it seems," Christopher Robin began, tracing the footprints with a stick. "We don't know who they are, but as good neighbours it's our job to find out and welcome them properly." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathering. Each creature warmed by the idea of extending their friendship circle. It was decided after much discussion and a few honey sandwiches, because Pooh declared he couldn't think properly on an empty stomach, that they would split into teams to track the footprints. Pooh, who was very fond of new friends, especially if they too were fond of honey, led one group. His team consisted of Kanga, who had a good eye for detail, and Owl, who was wise and knew many things, even if he didn't know everything. The other group was led by Piglet. This was a little surprising, as Piglet was a very small animal, and sometimes felt nervous about important things. But when Christopher Robin looked at him and said, "Piglet, we need your bravery," Piglet puffed up his chest, stood a little taller, and nodded determinedly. Eeyore and Roo were to accompany Piglet, their calm and cheerful demeanours bound to support the little Piglet. With a spirit of camaraderie, the two teams set off in different directions, following the trail of mysterious footprints. Pooh's group went towards the west, where the stream babbled over smooth, worn stones, and the honeybees buzzed in the clover, while Piglet's group ventured towards the shadowy depths of the eastwood, where the old pine trees whispered secrets to the wind. There was a thrill in the air as they embarked on their quest, their hearts full of the prospect of a new friend. Even the 100-acre wood seemed to share their excitement, the sun casting long, playful shadows that danced along with them, guiding their way on the grand adventure that lay ahead. For what could be more exciting than a new friend, a fresh set of footprints to follow, and the possibility of countless more tales to be woven in the heart of their beloved 100-acre wood? The 100-acre wood was awash with the delightful excitement of exploration. For Pooh and his group, the journey was filled with intrigue and just a hint of mischief. To Pooh, everything seemed a little more delectable. Every bush was inspected for potential honey stores, every crevice of the trees explored for hidden hives. There seemed to be a fair bit of honey about, Pooh announced with satisfaction, his voice muffled by the honeycomb he was industriously chewing. Our new friend must be quite fond of it too. Kanga smiled at Pooh's honey-centric deductions. She couldn't help but find humour in his simple, affectionate character. Owl, meanwhile, nodded sagely, although he knew better than to base their investigation solely on Pooh's love for honey. In the Eastwood, Piglet's group had a different adventure unfolding. Eeyore, with his usual gloomy charm, didn't expect them to find anything. "Most likely it's just another Tuesday," he muttered, but followed along in solidarity. Roo hopped around enthusiastically, peering into burrows and bouncing into bushes, his energy brightening up the shaded woodland. Piglet, wearing the hat of leadership, with unaccustomed nervousness, jumped at every rustling leaf and every snapping twig, seeing shadows of uncertainty around each corner. But with each passing moment, he found his courage growing. After all, even the smallest animals can surprise themselves when they have friends relying on them. As the sun began its descent, turning the sky into an artist's palette of oranges, purples, and pinks, the two groups found themselves at the same location. Their individual trails of adventure had led them to the end of the mysterious footprints at the entrance of a newly constructed den nestled against the roots of a mighty oak. Exhausted but exhilarated, the two parties exchanged stories of their quest. Pooh, with honey still smeared around his mouth, talked of his tantalizing findings of abundant honey. Piglet recounted his adventure through the East Wood, his voice shaky at first but gaining confidence as he spoke. As their chatter dwindled, the reality of their discovery settled in. They were at the doorstep of their new friend. The day's pursuit had led them here, to this quiet, snug little den hidden under the knotted roots of an old oak. There was a peculiar calmness that settled over them, a mix of tiredness from a long day of exploring and the trepidation of meeting someone new. As they huddled together, the soft whispers of the 100-acre wood around them, the day's journey seemed all the more precious. They were a team, an oddball group of explorers who were more than friends. They were a family, and they were about to welcome a new member into their special, tight-knit circle in the heart of the 100-acre wood. As the sun dipped behind the tall trees of the 100-acre wood, our friends huddled together outside the new den, a flurry of whispered conversations and expectant glances shared among them. Christopher Robin, the source of their courage, stepped forward, encouraging them with a reassuring nod. "Hello," he called out, his voice soft yet clear, echoing through the stillness of the wood. There was a pause, a quiet that seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the darkness of the den, they heard a rustling sound. Out came a creature they'd never seen before, covered in an array of bony plates, his small eyes twinkling with surprise and curiosity. It was an armadillo, a rather jovial and energetic one named Archie. "Hello there. Who might you all be?" Archie asked, his voice as cheerful as the twinkle in his eyes. The friends introduced themselves, their names rolling out like a comforting melody: Christopher Robin, Winnie the Pooh, Piglet, Eeyore, Kangaroo, and Owl. Archie, for his part, was pleasantly surprised to be welcomed by so many friendly faces after his long journey. As Archie shared his story, they gathered around, their curiosity piqued. The armadillo had strayed too far from his home and found himself in the 100-acre wood. His tale was filled with remarkable feats, charming encounters, and just a dash of misadventure, much like their own journey that day. "I simply lost my way," Archie admitted with a good-natured chuckle. "But I have to say the 100-acre wood is quite a friendly place, especially when one is greeted by such kind faces." His words touched their hearts, for they prided themselves on being just that, friendly and kind. It was as Christopher Robin often said: "You can never be unkind in the 100-acre wood, for that's not the wood's way." Even Eeyore managed a smile, his tail swishing in what could be mistaken for contentment. Kanga, ever the mother, offered Archie some of the food they'd packed for their expedition. Pooh, relishing the company of a new friend, declared that it was indeed a grand day for a picnic, even if it was dusk. As the sun cast long shadows, bathing the 100-acre wood in hues of twilight, they found a new bond forming. It was in the shared laughter, the exchange of stories, and the simple joy of new friendship. For all the anticipation and the tiny bit of trepidation, they had found a friend in Archie, and that made the entire day's adventure absolutely worth it. Even as they prepared to depart for their homes, each friend promised to return the following day, to share more stories, more laughter, and to make Archie feel more at home. for such was the way of the 100-Acre Wood, a place that turned strangers into friends and friends into family. The following day, as the first rays of sunlight painted the 100-Acre Wood in a warm, golden glow, our friends came together once more, a little bit excited and a lot more jubilant. The day was ripe with anticipation, not for the unknown, but for the newly known. Archie the armadillo, who was no longer a stranger, but a friend. Archie was welcomed with open arms, or in Pooh's case, open paws, ready for a bear hug. In their delightful clamour, they all worked together to set up a grand picnic, for every picnic is a celebration, and this one was in honour of their newest resident, Archie. "Here, Archie, this is honey," Pooh declared, pushing a pot of his beloved honey towards Archie. "There's nothing quite like it, you see." "And these," Kanga said, placing a batch of freshly baked cookies beside the honey pot, "are for everyone to share." Even Eeyore contributed a bunch of thistles, placing them near Archie, with a murmured, "You might like 'em." And that, in Eeyore's own way, was quite a warm welcome. As they all sat together, the air was filled with laughter and the sound of joyous eating. The very trees of the 100-Acre Wood seemed to sway in shared merriment. The friends had learned an important lesson, that the unknown need not be feared, and that a stranger was just a friend they hadn't met yet. Piglet, who had initially been the most apprehensive, was now sitting next to Archie, engaged in a spirited discussion about exploration and bravery. Roo, who had found a new playmate, was already planning their next adventure. Christopher Robin, watching them all with a warm smile, leaned back against the familiar trunk of his favourite tree. The 100-Acre Wood was a little larger that day, its boundaries extended by one more friend, its heart beating a tad more joyously. As dusk approached, the picnic began to wind down. It was a day to remember, filled with new friendship, shared adventures, and the sweet promise of many more tales to come. The 100-Acre Wood was indeed a lot richer with Archie, the once mysterious stranger, now a cherished friend in its midst. Before they parted, Christopher Robin spoke, his words echoing through the quieting wood. "Each friend represents a world in us, a world possibly not born until they arrive, and it's only by this meeting that a new world is born. Welcome to our world, Archie." And with a heart full of warmth, Archie responded, "Thank you, all of you. I couldn't have asked for a better place to lose my way to." Thus ended another day in the 100-Acre Wood, a day of unexpected footprints leading to expected friendships, of timid explorations blooming into joyful encounters. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, one thing was clear: the 100-Acre Wood was not just a place, but a feeling of home, friendship and love, a place where every stranger was just a friend waiting to be discovered.